I met Connie 20 years ago. I asked her to go to lunch with me to discuss a series that she had written for the Plain Dealer, a remarkable series about Michael Green, who was wrongfully convicted of rape and sent away for 13 years. And Connie accepted the lunch invitation. We had this wonderful discussion, but it wasn't very long before we started talking about writing in general and started talking about trusting ourselves to write the stories we really want to write. And one thing about Connie is she has a very good sense of people. And she really understands when people, especially women, are getting in their own way. And she is a master of the art of the nudge. And at one point she turned to me and she said, "What stories do you want to write? Why aren't you writing those?" And flash forward 20 years, and Connie is asking those questions of her students at Kent State, nudging and motivating a brand new generation of journalists and inspiring them to become the journalists that our society needs. And her students really love her. Her students consider her our Connie. I just want to show you something. This is a profile that one of her students wrote about her. This is how they feel. They know that Connie is their champion, their fan, and they continually wade into the deep end of the writerly pool with her semester after semester. And I'm sure that she's going to take us there tonight. So welcome, Connie. Welcome, all of you. Let's get started with this conversation.
Well, thank you, Jackie. That was quite an introduction. As you can see from that newspaper story, there was at least a small group of Kent State people who were really hoping Sheriff was going to run for president. I can't say I'm unhappy that he didn't, because I'm relieved. But Jackie recently won the Distinguished Teacher Award, and I bring that up because that's a very big deal at Kent State. She is a very big deal in our journalism school. I came to Kent State. I've told this to Jackie numerous times. She was one of the main reasons I came to teach at Kent State. It is my alma mater, and I love coming back and giving back to the place that launched my career. But Jackie is such a dedicated teacher. I knew a lot about writing, I thought, or at least what my kind of writing. I did not know a lot about teaching. And I don't think you automatically are a good teacher just because you're good in your field. And Jackie really helped me in the very beginning. She was one of the primary faculty members, and certainly have some wonderful colleagues. I think some of them are here with us tonight. Jackie knew me so well from before. We've been to each other's weddings. Mm-hmm. So it gave us a chance to talk a lot about writing. And because when you talk about teaching in the journalism school, what you're really talking about so often is talking about writing and how to teach writing. So Jackie, I'm really grateful that you're here tonight. I also have to say, I've never been able to see page after page of the people who are with us. This only happens in book groups. So that is just delightful to see so many of you. So thank you, all of you, for joining us tonight. My goodness. I got a little teary-eyed when I saw all of you. It's one thing to know you're out there somewhere, but here you are, you're right here. So thank you for being with us.
Yes, and we are already seeing a lot of questions on the chat. I was going to just get us started with one question, and then we'll start pulling from the chat. Connie, that was so sweet what you said about me. I do feel like we're a good team. I do feel that we inspire each other a lot. And in fact, when I was talking to you about how I envisioned this going, I kind of envisioned this being as an extenuated sort of conversation like we have at the copier or in the hallway. One of the things that I know a lot of people wonder is how you made the leap from journalism to fiction writing. I feel like a lot of journalists, I've heard this, even students, they think they have a novel in them. You actually did have a novel in you. How did you get it out, and how did your journalistic training help you get there?
Well, I didn't think I had a novel in me initially. This was not my idea initially. I love being a journalist, and I've loved being a columnist in particular. But right before my second book came out in 2007, my editor at Random House, Kate Medina, asked me to come to New York for a lunch with her and the publisher. And they had one reason for meeting with me. They thought the working class was really underrepresented in modern literature, and they thought I could do something about it. I certainly agreed with their premise. I do think the working class are dramatically underrepresented. And in fact, it's been really touching to hear from people who have working class backgrounds or are members of the working class now responding to my book. So often I'm hearing some version of, thank you for letting us have good grammar and all of our teeth. Mm-hmm. And that, you know, anybody who has come from that knows why that isn't even funny, right? They're so used to the stereotypes about us. Having said all that, though, I just didn't know if I was the one who could write that novel. I think part of it is I have such high regard for novelists. I've been reading fiction all of my life, almost all of my life, from the time I could read on my own, and I was an early reader. And it seemed like such a big, important thing to try to do. But I had to decide to do what I've always told my children, my children and my students now all the time. If you're never scared, you stop growing. And I must really be going through a growth spurt because I was absolutely terrified when this novel was about to come out. But I'm really glad I wrote it. The thing that finally got me going was that I did not want to have that regret of not having written it or not having finished it. I thought that would be worse than any reception I could have for the book. You can imagine my surprise and delight when it ended up being received really well, but it's been quite an experience. And you asked about the journalism. As you know, Jack, you mentioned that we first met over a narrative series I had done on. I think the narrative series work, I had done 3 of them before, and another big project before I left the Plain Dealer. And all of those use the fiction writer's tools to tell a nonfiction story. And so I had I had grown as a writer in that way, I would hope. I mean, I certainly learned a lot about dialogue, about foreshadowing, about reconstructing, and also just timing and rhythm. And I love film, and I used it so much in my writing. Camera moves in, camera pulls out, as I'm always telling my students. When should the camera move in? Yeah. When should it pull out? And really, writing this book was a lot like that, chapter by chapter.
Great. Well, I've already seen several questions, Connie, about that blue train case that's behind you. And I know that was
that's
something.
The one.
Yeah, there's multiple questions about that. And can you talk a little bit about how that factored into your book, and also maybe a little bit about how you used it in the classroom, because I know you did use it very successfully in the classroom as well.
I did. And then we're going to talk about your orange, because I couldn't figure out how to do the orange. So that's why I did the train case. The train case existed in my mind before I had that one. So it's not like I've always had that sitting around and was wondering how I could use it. When I realized the train case was going to be more important than just in that one scene of the book, and in fact, it's in the prologue now, I needed a train case from the 1950s. I needed to know what it looked like, what it smelled like, what it felt like, how heavy was it, how much could it hold. I kept stacking different things in it to see what it would hold without being too cumbersome. So I got on Etsy and eBay, and I don't remember which site had it, and I found one. It was in excellent condition. And I have gotten so many letters and emails and questions on social media or stories from readers about train cases in their lives. If not theirs, they often belong to their mothers or their grandmothers. And so often the train case is hitched to a dream. Dreams of, you know, a better life, a bigger life, a big adventure. And Jackie's right. Once I was done using it for the book, I thought, you know, I like if my students, as you know, Jack, our students can get very serious. It's very hard to loosen them up sometimes. And because we're always requiring so much of them. So I thought, occasionally I'm going to bring in a poem, like I love using Lucille Clifton's Note to Superman. And then their assignment, the response is Superman responds, and they're having to write it. Things like that, just to loosen them up, just to have them understand just the depth and breadth of their abilities that they're not even acknowledging in themselves. The train case is hilarious because nobody, including the male students, can figure out how to open it because it's those latches. And I probably have had a little too much fun with that. But I got the idea for writing prompts after hearing about Jackie and how she uses them in her classroom. Jack, talk a little bit about that. The orange, I remember you've had.
The fruit, yeah. Well, the orange, it's the fruit assignment. So I bring in some fruit. Usually there are oranges. It kind of depends on what's in season. But I bring fruit into the classroom for a descriptive writing exercise, and I have them do 3 things with a piece of fruit. Sometimes they want to eat it right away. And I say, first of all, I'm going to be in trouble if you eat in this room and mess it up. And secondly, you need this, so you cannot eat it yet. But I have them describe it in 1 line, pretty much. They have to,
and they can't use the word of the fruit, right? They cannot use
the word of the fruit, and they have to limit adjectives. So it's very hard.
Oh, that's
So
good.
that's one thing they do. Something that I let them, well, I don't do this. I let them take the fruit home with them, and they research it, and they have to write about the fruit from different dimensions. So
Oh, I love that.
architecturally or nutritionally or mythologically. And then I also make them describe some sort of action involving the fruit. So there have been, oranges and apples flying across the newsroom. There have been, apples that go from class to class with the students all day, just sitting there, just sort of observing. I mean, they've done all kinds of creative things with these fruits, but it's all to just, get them to think about description and observation and, using their senses. They're so used to just going and getting the interview, going and talking to people, but really requiring them to observe and to use their senses and also to research and look at simple things from different dimensions. It's very helpful. They like it. So I'm back to the chat here. I'm now writing things down because they're going so fast, they're kind of disappearing on me. This is a great question, Connie. If you could sum up your life in a headline, what would it be? We can come back to it if you want to think about that, but I really like that one.
What this is making me think of is I was on a really rough flight a couple of years ago. And it was pretty scary. And I usually get scared because I always tell myself, well, planes don't crash from turbulence. But when they say everybody get in your seats, they're yelling get in your seats to the attendants, everybody buckle. I thought, okay, this is sounding rather ominous. And I realized in that moment what a lucky life I've had. And I do think that. I mean, I don't think everything I've had, many, many people work harder than I feel like I work hard until I look at my mom's. I got her nurse's aide badge hanging right in front of me over the computer. And I've got Dad's, I don't think you can see it, but I've got his hard hat up there. And I've never worked a hard day in my life compared to what they had to do. So I just thought, what a lucky life. Thank you. This was great. I'd like not to go right now. I'd like to not have this plane go down. But honestly, I have no grievance if it does. But thank you for my lucky life. So I guess she lived her life was lucky. I don't know. That's how I feel. But that's quite a question I've never been asked before. What would yours be, Jack?
I'm still catching my breath. I don't I just find life so interesting and unpredictable, and I'm always just, I feel like I have to write sometimes to even figure out what I think about things, so I
understand that.
I'm writing to figure it all out. So maybe that's it.
I know
to figure it all out.
My one of my oldest friends, Buffy Philbell, once said that on my tombstone it should read, "May she not rest in peace. Why should she? She never let us." And I thought that's pretty good. I like that. I can live with that.
So is there going to be a sequel, Connie, to this book?
There might be, but it's not the novel I'm working on right now. I am at work on my second novel. It is in Erietown, but it's a lot of new people. And there's going to be an independent bookstore in it. And as just one of the things this grandmother has decided to do for a couple decades, because her husband runs the hardware store and she worked with him for years, and thought she had to send away for all her books. So they had to make a special trip to Cleveland or to Erie. And she's just decided years ago, well, I'm going to open a bookstore. And I finally figured out something that I didn't know how to do the first time. This time, the floor plan of that bookstore is our house, the downstairs of our house. And so I won't forget where things are once I figure out where they are. And I've drawn this big thing now, the bookstore and the floor plan, and I'm moving things around, but I'm getting an idea where everything is. Because one of the things I had to keep fixing was I'd have them in one room of the house, and my editor would say, well, but isn't that next to the bedroom? Ah! And I have to start over and fix it again. So this time I know the floor plan.
So what time period is this set in? This current
novel?
Yeah.
At this point, I'm looking at the early aughts, perhaps. It's going to be a granddaughter who's she's just having a time of it. She's in her early 20s, so she's going to spend the summer with her. So unlike Erietown, that was from the 1940s through the 1990s, I think this is going to be 3 months, over a 3-month period of time. But there's a lot going on in it. There's a lot, and I'm excited about it. So that's when I knew I had an idea. I mean, my editor, my agent, you should be halfway through this by the time your book comes out. Okay, all right. No, that's just not happening. Especially with the coronavirus, it just threw everything into a tizzy. But I'm writing now. I have this little ritual. See this tea light. I'm going to hold it up a little bit. It's a little tea light. I light it when I first start writing in the morning, and I make myself keep writing until it burns out. I mean, I stand up every hour to get up and move, but it's about a 3.5 hour tea light, and it keeps me disciplined, and it's how I got the other book finished.
Oh, wow. I'm glad you mentioned that, Connie, because that's part of your process. And that's something we try to do, is instill in students that they need to have a process, and you only become a writer if you write, and you have to do things to make yourself produce the best writing you possibly can. And so I'm just wondering, is there anything else you want to share about your process and the little things that you do to make your writing time more productive?
One of the things I do to make sure it's easier to come back to it, and that I'm eager to get back to it the next day, is I end where I know I want to start next. And I got that advice many years ago, and I have found it so helpful, because it's really hard some days to get yourself motivated to get the seat of your pants into the seat of your chair if you don't really know where you're going next. I do with this book what I do with every column, with every story I've ever written, and I tell my students all the time, and Jackie, I suspect you're the same. I read aloud everything I write. I never hit send until I've read it aloud. You catch repetitive words that don't need to be repetitive. You catch grammar mistakes. You'll catch mistakes in rhythm. I really am a big believer in the rhythm of writing. And I just think there's no way. I remember a student once said to me, Rabbi, it's when I do this, I feel really stupid. People look at me, they can hear me laugh. And I said, well, which is going to be more stupid, flunking this assignment or having a few people overhear you when you're reading it? I mean, think about this. As I'm always saying to them, think this through. Think this through. But I never flunk them for that. I just want them to understand it doesn't matter what people think when we're in the creative process. We're already freaks of nature. So we try to conform as best we can to function in the world. But writers are different, and artists are different. I mean, whenever you're trying to be creative, your mind's working a little differently. I'm curious, Jack, what are some of your things that keep you writing?
Well, I'm an avid journaler, so I'm always journaling. I'm gonna have to burn a lot of journals at some point, because I mean, I don't censor them at all, and everything I think goes into them, but I will journal almost every day and then go back and pull from things that I'd written over the week. It's where I get a lot of my essay ideas. I haven't written a novel. Probably the next book I do, I don't think I will be pulling from that so much. It's more, helpful for essays. But, for the book that I did, it was different. It was more just a regimen. I mean, I read constantly. I read absolutely everything. And so I had reading time and I had writing time every day. So
that's
just breaking it up. Yeah, breaking it up like that. I also write in different places, different locations.
Well, as I tell my students, you have to be able to write in different locations. You can't get wedded to just this one place. I mean, I have columns on the floors of public bathrooms and airports, because that's where I found an outlet. I mean, you've got to work where you can work. And I think that's really important. So I'm glad that you do that. And I'm sure you communicate that to your students as well. The more fluid you can be with it, the more productive you will be in your career.
Well, this is bringing to mind something about one of the characters, really multiple characters. In another interview, Connie, you talked about how this is the feminist movement you didn't hear about. Women, especially women in the 40s, 50s, even 60s, kind of squashing their dreams, to just serve everybody else, to make sure their family was okay, to make sure all the expectations of them, that they met all of those, and they just push their needs, their desires, their ambitions down. And you just, these characters that you create, especially Ellie, you show them coming out of that. You show them, expanding. And anyway, I just wondered if you could talk, because I feel like we're talking about writing and making sure we have time to write, and believing in ourselves and trusting that whatever it is we want to do, whatever our students want to write, we should, do that. How did writing the characters, how did writing their struggle, how did you pull? Do you pull from your own life, to craft that struggle, or from the lives of your family?
I'm the first in my family to go to college. I come from the working class, and certainly there are themes and elements of the book that come from my life. I mean, I grew up in a working class town on Lake Erie, and my editor had great advice. She said, you can make it a whole lot like Ashtabula, just don't call it Ashtabula, because everybody there will tell you what you got wrong. So I call it Erietown, and it's got parts of Ashtabula that I want to be in there, and then I can change it when I want. Ellie, as it turned out originally, was not well developed in the book. And my editor actually really bluntly said, could we make her less pathetic? And at first I bristled and I thought, she's right. She's right. Ellie still has dreams. And let's give Ellie a dream from the beginning, because nursing school wasn't there at first for Ellie. And that's when the train case became more important. And I wanted to show, you know, the feminist movement, this is so typical, I thought, from my own experience in my own working class town. The feminist movement wasn't about working class women. It was about highly educated women living on the coast mostly. They were very good at public speaking. There was these were, you know, the women like Ellie, very much like my mother, were not going to have time for rallies. They had hourly wage jobs that they could lose if they didn't show up for work. But the movement still invaded their lives and lifted their lives in ways that they couldn't see initially. And I wanted to show it through the questions they asked of one another. And I wanted to show it particularly with Ellie, and how she wants, even if she can envy the opportunities that her daughter Sam has at times, she wanted to lift up the life of her daughter in ways that she had not been. And so there's that inner tension, right? In addition to the typical mother-daughter tension. And when she buys Our Bodies, Ourselves, which is actually, do I have it here? No, that was my copy from the 1970s. And my mother would never have bought that for me, by the way. But Ellie ends up deciding, and they have to drive out of town to get it, which is when I first got the idea for a bookstore in the next novel. Because I thought, you know, there really is a need there. Well, now there's a need so much, but there was a need in the 90s and the early aughts for bookstores in smaller towns. And so I thought that's when I think I first got the idea for that.
Oh, that's great. I'm wondering if you've thought about what your mother would have thought of the book. Would she have seen herself in Ellie?
No, even though she's, you know, there's, I think she would have loved it, but Mom tended to be very biased on my behalf. There's a list that Ellie makes at one point of nurses' aid. She's so frustrated because she thinks her husband, Brick, doesn't really understand her, doesn't know why she loves her job and why it matters. So she goes by herself for the first time into a restaurant, and she makes a list of her job duties as a nurse's aide. That is actually a partial list of a list my mother made that we did not find until after her death. And she had made enough copies for everyone in the family, which haunts me, because I do wonder, did my mother think we didn't really understand what she did? Did she think we really didn't see her in that role? I mean, I wanted my mom not to be mistreated on the job. I was always talking to her about the pay, and when there was a union effort, they didn't want to organize her, you know, the aides. I was so typically Connie, that I didn't really think to ask her much about her job at times. When she died, my dad said, one calling hour, we'll just have for 2 hours. We died. There were more than 800 people who showed up that night for her. And
wow.
I know this not to be unusual for women like my mother, because they touch the lives of everyone they encounter. And that was true for her. The women who altered her pants because she was only 4'11", the guy who always worked on her car, you know, it was everyone. So I wanted to show the richness of these lives, and to also make clear that even if their lives seem to be hopeless or have no meaning to people who are luckier, their lives are often very rich in ways that may not appeal to us, but don't mean that they're not rich for them, even as they've had to live with a lot of broken dreams. And I love women, as you know. So women, I can't write enough about women. Although I did have a male friend tell me recently, he said, I'm really glad you didn't make all the guys jerks. And I said, well, why would I do that? I don't think all men are jerks. I just think women have so many stories that have to be told yet.
You know, and I think that might be the reason these characters, who are characters we don't normally see in New York Times bestselling novels. We don't normally see the working class women from the Midwest, but you were able to bring a universality to their struggles, to their dreams, that I think people just get it. I think people just get them, even if they haven't known people like them specifically. It's funny, one of your minor characters was Greta Marino, you know, who was kind of the, you know, gossipy person. And it's funny, like I feel like that could be a relative of mine. It could be. It's really interesting, but it doesn't have to be. Like the characters were just, again, their dreams, their hopes, their humanity sort of transcended their station, transcended their place, their environment. And I just thought that was really touching.
I'm really grateful to hear you say that. And I hope what also comes across here, because there are some, I hope, universal truths in it. One of them is that for most of us, our biggest mistake, we are bigger, we are better than our worst mistake. But we can often, because we surrender to our own version of who we are in some diminished version after we make this big mistake, or others fuel it in us, and it can really undermine a person. It can really alter the trajectory of your life. And even Brick, when I first turned in the book, my editor said Brick McGinty was the most realized character. And I'm not surprised by that, because I was more nervous about writing it from a male perspective. So I've spent an awful lot of time. I interviewed utility workers. I got the workers manual when they first got hired when Brick got hired. I got a manual from that year from the Utility Workers Union that explained how electricity was made, which ends up being how I have Brick drawing on a napkin showing his kids how electricity is made. It came from that manual that I found from the 1960s.
So this is another way your journalism background played into your ability to write fiction so well, I think. You know, the research that you did, you knew what kind of research you needed to do to be able to render that character well.
Well, don't you find this true? For me, research is almost a break. The writing is always the hardest part. I love research.
Research is fun.
Yeah. So the research, like right now, I'm watching all these old movies. First of all, with Greer Garson, because I think one of my characters is going to be named Greer. For Greer Garson. So I wanted to, and I wanted to be able to explain why she named her daughter Greer. And it's Mrs. Miniver, I think, is the movie that will probably be the reason why. But I wanted to actually watch it and take notes so she could say something. And I hope to have this be a little more, I mean, I think there are moments of humor, certainly in Erietown, but I'd like to have a little lighter touch with this one. And I'm also just watching all these movies on bookstores and reading books that have been written about running bookstores, but the movies are fun. You know, they tend to be romanticized a lot. Bookstores are very hard to do, but I'm just trying to consume it in various ways and in pop culture ways that most people would be familiar with, because those references, I can't get over how many readers have been talking about cultural references and how they resonated for them in the book. And one of the ways I did those, you know, those little pamphlets I used to have at greeting card stands, in the year that you were born, this was the top sign. I have them from like 1946 through 1996. And I found them on Etsy, on eBay, at rare bookstores, some of them on Amazon. Because I didn't want to make this a heavy historical reference. I mean, most people, wars matter. The Vietnam War, of course, I was going to include, but a lot of this stuff, it just has to come out of real life and the things that you're actually encountering.
Oh, absolutely. So Connie, I'm going to go back to some of these questions here. We talked already about how your teaching is informed by your writing, but how has your writing been informed by your teaching? Once you started teaching, how did your writing change?
Oh, I think it made me take myself more seriously as a writer again, because it made me find my courage in the novel I was writing. I finished this novel because I was teaching. I am sure of it. And part of the reason for that is I had to be more structured in my time, because I put a lot of time, as you do, into the teaching. But also, I just kept telling my students that they had to, I was trying to help them find their courage, because I had such faith in them. And I thought, well, it would be pretty hypocritical of me to not find my own courage and finish this book, to not risk it. And also, I just love bringing in an advanced reader copy of my second book that has more than 100 little tags, sticker tags on it, because those were all the mistakes or revisions we found after it was out in the review copy. And I show them this, and I say, you think you don't like revision. I really want to get you to the place where it's your favorite thing to do, because the anxiety is over. You've done the draft. Yeah. Now let's play with the words. You had to learn all the rules before you could figure out which ones you were going to break. And revision is the chance to do that. So I like bringing the work in to show them. I love showing them some of my hate mail, just because it cracks them up. They're aghast. And I always tell them, if you think you're going to reach a point in your career where you're not getting that, you better never express an opinion about anything. And I'm curious, Jack, because you write too and publish while teaching.
Oh, sure.
And so I would ask you the same thing. How has teaching affected your work, and how has the work affected your teaching?
Well, it definitely gives you more credibility with your students, with your journalism students, if you're writing journalism or if you're writing anything, So I don't ever want to give that up. You know, I knew when I entered the academy that I would probably change some of the writing that I did, because academic writing is, you don't have to do it, but I kind of liked it. I sort of dipped my toe in the water and thought it was pretty fun and enjoyed it. And so for a couple of years, I did more academic writing on literary journalism, you know, on what I aspired to write. But it was hard to get back into, you know, essay writing and articles. But I'm at the point now where I've finished all the academic things I had in the hopper. So I'm quickly pivoting back. You know, I have a book proposal that's almost done. You know, I have a lot of things that I'm doing. I'm very excited about doing mostly full-fledged journalism again. And I know the teaching and writing, it's just a cycle. Like I don't really even think about, oh, I have to, you know, get ready for class tomorrow. You know, class is a great time to recharge, you know, being able to talk about things like voice and structure and to just look at really good sentences. It inspires me to try to write my own sentences better, you know? So I don't even think about it as two separate things. I think about it, I would be really hard for me to not teach now. You know, I've been teaching for, well, 14 years at Kent State, but I can't imagine not teaching now.
What an interesting perspective, because for me, the teaching is always the harder part. I am always worked up the night before I have to teach. I'm always worried that I'm not doing enough for my students. I don't require textbooks, so I'm always having to find material to give them enough stuff. So I'm trying to, especially in opinion writing, for example, I want to keep very current. In ethics class, what happened in the news this week that we can use. So but I think part of it is I haven't been teaching as long, and it was never a goal. I mean, I wasn't planning to do this at this point in my
Connie,
career.
Do you remember when you first started teaching and I told you I was using Michael Green? I was using the Michael Green story, and you were like surprised. Like, really? You're using that? And then I said, you know, you should probably use it too, because we teach the same class. You know, we teach feature writing, and you're teaching in like the other part of the hallway, and I'm using your work in class, and you're not using your work in class. And I think eventually you did, right? You eventually used
I did
some
once,
of your work.
I did. I'll talk about it, but I don't make the read again. And here's why. I'm just very self-conscious about, I don't want to be that, and Jackie knows this, I've had many conversations with her. I don't want to be somebody who gets up in the class and says, okay, now we're going to talk again about just how wonderful I've been. I'm just not that kind of writer, and I'm very self-conscious about it. In opinion writing, I will use my stuff occasionally, and we'll look at them. Like we do the Pulitzer package, because I want to tell them how I got the idea for each column, how I executed it, what were the obstacles we had, and what was the impact of the columns, because with the Pulitzers, a lot of it's about the impact of the writing. I'm more comfortable doing that in opinion writing, because it is the thing I love, right? I've been doing it for a very long time now. And our students are being asked at very much younger ages to be giving their opinions and things, and to weighing in on blogs and essays and stuff when they get hired. And I want them to have that experience that most of their peers will not have had by the time they get out of college. I am so glad we have prioritized opinion writing. I think it's a crucial skill for our students. And with the fiction even, I always say to them, now that I've got this novel, I am living proof that you don't know what all you get to do. But I was once you, and I had no contacts, I had no money, nobody in my family had influence. You don't need that. What I had was a hunger. I was so hungry to write. And I've never lost that. And you may think you're not going to last in journalism, or you may not be excited about journalism right now. I'm telling you, if you can write a really good cover letter, or even a letter for an application, or you're going to write that fiction you want to write, knowing the basics of journalism, and especially feature writing, really helped form the rest of my career.
You know, and we see that all the time on internship reports. You know, students often will put feature writing down as the most helpful class, especially the ones that go to magazines and online outlets where they're being asked to write longer form stuff. And, you know, I am really inspired by all the good stuff that's out there. I mean, there is just so much good work. It used to be, Connie, you probably remember, it used to be you would like wait for your favorite magazine to arrive. You know, your Rolling Stone, or, you know, even like Time magazine. I remember, you know, running to the mailbox. I was such a geeky kid. My parents got so many magazines, and Time magazine, I looked forward. I would read it cover to cover when I was like in high school. Now you just click on, and there's so much great journalism everywhere. And I think it's only gotten more so, you know, as, you know, we've had things happen in our in our world where, you know, we have to be better. You know, we have to
That's right.
cover difficult things. I want to get to a question here from a younger reporter. This is someone who needs some advice on how to do investigative stories, because what if you don't have much experience, but you really want to do those stories? You want to hold, you know, ask the hard questions. You want to hold people accountable. You know, what kind of advice do you have to someone like that, especially because they're worried about, you know, losing a source that they might need? You know, we've all run into that, right?
Right. But
worry about that.
Well, the thing is, you have to ask yourself, have you gotten to the point where you're so afraid of losing the source that you're failing to report the story? We are, if you really care about the work, you end up caring about a lot of your sources, and you have to be clear with yourself and with those sources always what you're doing. We practice more than we used to. I didn't do this initially when I was teaching. Now we do, where I will interview students because they wanted to see how I interview. And what I love is they almost always say they said a lot more than they intended to. And I want to show that it's not because they were forced or bullied, it's because conversations can happen naturally. I really try to emphasize with my students the power of the pause. Somebody's going to have to fill that space of silence. You don't have to be the one. If somebody gets upset with a question you've asked me, if they're like, oh my God, nobody's ever asked me that before, you can so immediately want to say, oh, I'm so sorry. You can say that, but say, do you need a moment? And then just wait. And then they tend to fill the space. The only way you get over being nervous, well, first of all, let me say this. I still have times when I call to interview somebody and I'm nervous because I know, first of all, I'm the last person they want to talk to. They know what I'm doing at this point, the story often. And I know that they're not going to, if they thought they disliked me, they're going to really dislike me by the end of it, but it's usually a public official, so I'm good with that. Being married to one especially, I'm just good with that. I understand that. But there's never a time where we feel like that we're never going to be nervous about what we're doing. I want you to understand that, and that there's no substitute for practice. The more you do it, the better you get at it. And if you're nervous about an interview, have a friend, if a friend's willing to, bounce some questions off them. Brainstorm with them, brainstorm with us. I mean, I've sat with so many students, not all of them mine, but I love when they come in and they tell me they've got this interview coming up and they're nervous, and we'll just brainstorm. So what's the stuff what do you need to know? What is the reader entitled to know if it's a public official, or what do you want the reader to know to better understand this person? The other thing I always tell my students, every big story, no matter how big, is about the people in it. And you need to look no further than the White House when you look at political coverage right now and what's happening with this administration. It's about the people in it, right? It's always about the people in it. So the more that you can explain, the better you can get to know people, and the more you can interview them. Only in the movies do you charge in and you're rude to everybody and you get the big story. For me, it was always about relationship building, especially when I had beat coverage. I would get to know every secretary and receptionist, every doorman, because first of all, they're people too. And I was raised to understand that they're important too, and they have hopes and dreams. But also, if they feel that you respect them, if you show an interest in them, when there's breaking news, you're going to get in when others get stopped. And I know that from deep, long personal experience.
Absolutely. I would definitely second that. I've witnessed it. You know, I am married to a journalist who, you know, gets scoops like that all the time because of just that longevity and just that constant, you know, being the person who's just always there and always willing to go into the deeper territory, you know, even if it's going to be unpopular. There's a question here about local journalism and about what's happening, you know, with the consolidation. How do you see local journalism surviving?
Well, I think it has to have companies or owners who care about the journalism and the people who are producing it for them. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. And I would certainly say that's been a problem in Cleveland. The goal was to break the union at the Plain Dealer, and they have finally succeeded. When I started at the Plain Dealer, there were more than 400 members of the guild, the union there, when I started in 1993. And it no longer exists, and it just was one blow after another. And you would expect me to have this opinion from my background, but it's also from my experience. I don't understand why any company wouldn't want workers to be able to negotiate salaries, wages, and work conditions. Why wouldn't you want people who are happy in their jobs? We do a better job. And if we hadn't had the newspaper guild, I don't think I could have won the Pulitzer as a columnist. I wouldn't have had the nerve I mean, they could take away my position, but they weren't going to be able to fire me for my opinions. And the worst thing you want is somebody you decided to take the column away from, and she's still in your newsroom. So at least if it's me, because I wasn't going to go, gently on that. And I just think it really makes a difference. So I think local journalism, we're seeing it. They're definitely seeing. Look what happened. Let's see, was it Montana with the story about the postal service? I think that story first came out of Montana with a reporter there who found out that they were starting to pick up the mailboxes, and they were taking equipment out, and that became a national story because of that single interview. So I never doubt the power of local journalism. And as Jackie, I'd love to know what you tell your students, because I say to them often, they are going to be the future of this profession, and they are going to think of things we can't even imagine yet that's going to help our profession get stronger.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot more outlets pop up, nonprofits and for-profits.
Yeah.
There's so much support for people that want to do this, whether it's a newsletter, like the Portager, which is a great source of news that you can just get in your inbox for free, or the Land in Cleveland, which is a new one. I mean, there's so many. I think that eventually we're going to figure it out. It's just, it is going to look different. It is definitely going to look different. But the important thing is what you were saying, the story is the people. The story is the things that affect people's lives. We need to focus on that. We need to talk to people. We need to be part of our communities. I know it's hard with COVID because we are locked down more than we have ever been, but there's still lots of ways to reach out to people, events like this, where we're talking about writing, talking about journalism, talking about Kent State. Another question for you. This is a writing question. How is book editing? How are book editing and journalism editing different? And you've gone through the experience of book editing and the experience of being edited for journalism. How is it different?
Well, I had one of the best editors in journalism when I had Stuart Warner.
Oh,
and
yes.
He edited both Michael Green and my columns the year I won the Pulitzer. So one of the things I love about Stuart, it sounds so simple, and yet it's really big when you think about the imagery of it. He did not think editors should sit behind the computer with the writer sitting next to him editing their work. He thought, and you see this on Fridays when we used to have the big turnout for the weekend writings, right? I'd walk down the city desk, I'd see all these really miserable looking reporters sitting next to editors who were typing on their stories. He felt very strongly that the writer needs to be in the chair because, first of all, you get the muscle memory of editing, right, of your own work. You can talk about it, but so I was really, I had some other good editors. I've had some pretty bad ones, but I've always told my students, find the ones who will help you. Even if you're not reporting to them, they typically will help you. And I was talking to Stuart long before he was my editor. Book editing is really different. I have one of the giants in the industry, Kate Medina. She's done, oh God, everybody, including Isabel Wilkerson's new book, Cast, that just came out, and John Irving, and Dr. Rowe, and Anna Quinlan, and I mean, she's just done, and Amy Bloom, and she's my editor. And she came after me right after the Pulitzer. And she actually sends, when she edits, she does 10 pages of notes initially, 10 pages single-spaced of her thoughts when she read the first draft, that's when they bought the book. So the good news is, hey, they bought the book, and I was very excited. I started crying in the airport, and this woman gave me a tissue and said, I don't, she was much older than I, and she said, I think it's good news, but I must tell you, your mascara is just smearing all over your face. So that was really good news.
She's going to be a character in this next novel, isn't she? You're going to find some way to work her into a column.
That's right. I think that's right. That's right. Yeah, now you said that, I already can imagine where she could work out. But with book editing, she sends me the printout with pencil edits all the way through it. And I had to cut, I don't know why it never occurred to me to ask anyone, or even to just think, what's the average length of a novel? It's about 110,000 words, I found out. I turned in 197,000 words. So I had to cut tens of thousands of words, which was fine. The book is better. It's just when you're editing fiction, a good editor never says, this character has to do this, and this, what about this? What about that? And Kate Medina tells this wonderful story about E.L. Doctorow, where she wrote a note to him and said, I really like this character, and I would love to know more about her. And he wrote back and he said, no, she has said all she's going to say. And Kate let it, that's it. Okay. And she did that with me over and over again. But she had some very good advice. Like Brick was originally violent. She said, you know, I think people, they want to like him. They want to believe he can get better. But if he's violent, they're just going to hate him. I decided if I was going to do that, because he came from a violent home, I was going to have to show how he struggled. Not occasionally, he had to be very conscious to not be violent like his father, because we know how domestic violence, it tends to trend in families. It's an inherited vice. So that was how we talked it through. And there were other moments. For those who haven't read it, I don't want to get into it too much, but certainly moments of my life, fast-moving life at times. The loss of my brother to suicide last July, which I will give, it brought me to my knees. There's just no question. And we were in the final edits of my book, but it made me have a voice of authority I'd never had before. When one of the characters, it's clear she's despondent, but somebody who was weighing in on the book on a conference call at Random House said, I'm not sure we're convinced that she would feel the need to do this. And I said, if I've learned anything, it's that we never understand. Those of us who are left behind never fully understand how that was the route to go. That's part of it. And I didn't want to pretty that up, and I didn't want to spell it out. I wanted the readers to feel it as the stunning thing perhaps it could be, or the thing that you could see it coming and there's just no way to stop it, even though you wish you could.
You know, Connie, just hearing you talk about that character specifically and its connection to your own life and what happened with your brother, I mean, it seems like this was an emotional process for you writing this book, that you feel, I mean, I know that for the narrative nonfiction that you've done, you know, you spent a long time, you know, doing those stories. The Losing Lisa series, where you were with a woman who was dying of breast cancer, a young woman with children. You know, you had the sort of emotional capacity to be able to do that, but I know it really affected you. It really affected your life.
It did.
Hearing you talk about the novel, even though these are not real people, but there are things about real people in your life that you have sort of reflected, you know, in these characters. I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about the emotional
the characters
impact.
become real to you. They have to if you're going to develop them. And they may have had nuggets of people I knew, some of them, like Ellie and Brick certainly they have my parents' professions, because those are the working class professions I knew best. But quickly they became their own people. Sharon tells a story. I'll change the name because I don't want to give it away to people who may want to read it who haven't yet, but let's call him George. And he walked in one day and I looked really down. This is when I was doing final revisions and I had written a particular section, finally rewritten it one more time. And he said, what's the matter? And I said, well, George died today. And he said, well, you're writing the book. You knew George was going to die. And I said, yes, but I've known George for 7 years and I'm going to miss him. And it was really that honest feeling I had in that moment, that I had really become attached to him in some ways, but I knew he had to go. It was just, I'd always known he was going to die. And I wrote that death scene 2 years before the book was finished. I mean, I would go back and polish and change it here and there, but I always knew how it was going to happen. And I had a sense of it. And I think part of that is, you mentioned Losing Lisa, which changed my life, quite frankly, writing that series. My mom was a hospice home care worker in the last years of her life. And mom died the year after the series ran. And I'll never forget when Lisa was really, really sick and her head kept, I told my mom, I was with her at Bed Bath & Beyond because my mom had come in and was staying with me for a few days. And I said, you know what, Mom, I want to get Lisa a pillow, that ring pillow that runs around. She says, why? And I said, because her head is just flopping. And she took my hand and she said, it's too late for that. She doesn't need that. What she needs is the bed to be reclined. And she said, and she started talking about the different things that she would need. And of course the hospice nurse was all over that. She already knew that too. Because I talked to her, I said, I'm just kind of curious. She did that pillow that would get in the way, that could suffocate her if it would, it was just these little details that made me not afraid to write about death in the same way that because we are, it's not like I'm obsessed with it, but I didn't want to be afraid of it all the time. So much of our work, right, as journalists and as writers, as novelists, is confronting our own fears, confronting the things we're most afraid of. And I think that's probably where I'm going with all this from here on in, is the biggest fears. I'm going to wrestle into the ground like that monster at the door in the first novel. So many have talked about the grief knocking at the door, but that's how I figured out for myself what grief was. If you don't let it in, it's just going to keep knocking, and you just got to sit with it until you get bored with each other. And then you get to move on.
You know, Connie, it's interesting that you just mentioned that, grief is a monster, because there was a question in the chat about that. If that was based on an experience that you had.
Yes, I would say it's a direct experience about grief, not with my brother, an earlier experience. And I was just, I'd read a lot about the Buddhists. I'm not Buddhist, but I loved reading the Buddhist perspective on dying. And I just really came to understand that the more you want away from it, the closer it's running on your heels. And you will get tired of each other if you let it in. And that's how you move on. And that was really what I had to learn after the death of my mom.
That is going to sink in for the rest of our conversation. I have to process that, but wow, it's very, very well said.
Thank you.
So we just have a few more minutes. I'm going to filter through a couple of like sort of quick questions, I think. One is about the audio version of your novel.
Oh, yeah.
And how the narrator was chosen.
Well, Cassandra Campbell has done some of the big ones lately. Some of you, if you are like Lilac Girls, what's the best? It's still on the bestseller list. Crawdad, or the Crawdad thing. She wanted to be the narrator, but they let me pick. They sent me different samples of their work, and I listened to Cassandra, and I knew her history. She has a particular talent for portraying other voices, and male and female, which, I didn't really set out to write this broad sweep of a novel. It ended up becoming that with all these different characters and over a period of time. And I thought that she did a good job, including showing the aging of, and she's an actor, and it shows in her ability. So that's how Cassandra Campbell was picked. And I'm just delighted with her work.
Great. Okay, here's another one. If you could ask Franklin or Walter one question, what would it be?
Who peed on the carpet while Sharon was on the computer here 2 hours right before this happened? I had to bring the machine up, and they're both watching me do it. That's what I want to know. Which one of you did this? And I'm sure it's because Sharon had the door closed. I was in the shower with the door closed, so thinking, well, this is not going to work. Why are they closing us off?
This is the question you asked them today, but it'll probably be a different question tomorrow.
Yes, I love those dogs. Anybody who asks me about Walter Franklin already knows I love those dogs. In fact, today, there will always be dogs in my novel. And Sharon this is the other tip I forgot to mention. Always write down as soon as you have a thought. If you have an idea, don't think you're going to remember it later. Write it down when you're writing, when you're working on stuff. And if you don't, say it to the person with you. So between the two of you, maybe you'll remember. Sharon and I were walking. We take morning walks with our dogs when he's home. And Walter's is always going to go where the trouble is. And I always have to pull him back. And I said, he really is that monkey see, monkey do. And I thought, Monkey do. That'd be a great name for a dog. David, and his nickname could be Monk, right? But the story behind it was everything he could get into, he did. And she said it once, and that's how they named him Monkey Do. So you see, and I said, so I turned to Sharon and I said, I don't have a pen on me. Can you remember Monkey Do and the dog? And he did. When we walked home, he goes, don't forget Monkey Do. And there were two neighbors watching us at work, and I thought, they have no idea what we're talking about. And that's just fine.
Well, that's great. Okay, I think this might be the last question. Aunt Nessa, you have an Aunt Nessa fan on the chat. Is she based on a real person?
She's really a composite of two women I love very much. My sister Toni, who has never had children but is a teacher, and my friend Sue Klein, who has never had children of her own but has, first of all, more than a dozen nieces and nephews, and so many interns have loved her. She now works in Sharon's office, but I knew her first in the Plain Dealer. She's one of my best friends. They both, what I wanted was a female character. There are actually two of them who don't have children of their own. Aunt Lizzie, who's a very different personality from Aunt Nessa. But I wanted to show that there are women, even back in the day, right, who often made sacrifices because they wanted to have careers, and that they wanted to have a bigger life than what they perceived in the small towns where they were growing up. And Nessa was one of them. And I actually heard from a Nessa in Wales, who now lives in Dublin, Ireland. And she didn't even know there was a Nessa. She said, I can't wait to read your book. I'm hearing many wonderful things about it. And she started telling me a story from her life about a train case. And I said, did you know there's a Nessa in my book? There is an Aunt Nessa, and I hope you like her. And as it turns out, she did very much.
That's wonderful. Well, I think that is all that we have. It's 8 o'clock. I want to just Thank you, Connie. I always love talking to you.
Same, Jackie.
You're such a dear friend, and I can't wait till we're in the same space again.
Me too. I miss you.
And yeah, I miss you too. And everyone, it's been such a delight sharing, this space with your fans. And the questions are wonderful. And I'll just keep following up with them on Facebook, I guess, because I follow all the happenings there. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
To find
Thank
us.
you.
And yes, and thanks again for being there. And thanks.
I see a
thank you,
cat.
Jay.
I see a dog. I see all these pets. So Jay, you want to close us up?
Well, thank you everyone for coming out tonight for a wonderful conversation. And the recording of this will be made available at some point later on after we have a chance to download it and clean it up a bit. And we'll make that available and we can send that out and post that on our website and on our YouTube channel probably. All right.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.